Ladies and gentlemen, we're back in the podcast studio today, and we got a very, very good friend, a very special guest, someone I really respect in our space. And Justin's no stranger to the Talk is Sheep podcast. He's been on before. Diehard, hardcore hunter. Justin Spring, Executive Director of Pope and Young. Welcome to the podcast, brother. Great to have you back.
Man, you make me sound pretty special. I appreciate that, Kyle.
Well, you truly are, man. And I tell you, there's a lot of people I respect in our hunting space that have a lot of respect for you, and I certainly share that. And you've been in our hunting community in the conservation leadership role, having been with Boone and Crockett before. You were on the podcast in that role. And, I'll tell you, that was one of my more I wouldn't maybe necessarily call it fun podcast, but one of the podcasts I enjoyed the most. I learned so much about the great work that Boone and Crockett's doing, and I know you're very mission driven. You've come over to Pope and Young, and you've carried that over with you. So, really excited to sort of do the deep dive today into Pope and Young. And so, maybe just for our listeners, Justin, it's been a while since you've been on. It's been 3 or 4 years probably. Maybe just a little touch on your background and what brought you into the space and how you got involved in the conservation world, and maybe what hunting means to you. Because I look at hunters out there, and I'm like, if I was like a more serious hunter, I'd like to be like Justin Spring, man, because you get out and get after it. And for me, when I look at you, it's like your family is an ecosystem of hunters. You guys believe in it, you live it, you breathe it, you tell the story, you do it right every single time. So welcome. I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, no. So my background, I got a degree in biology and natural resources at Northland College in northern Wisconsin. Back in the early 2000s, out of college, we kind of bounced around worked for Idaho Fish and Game, worked for Plum Creek Timber in Oregon doing wildlife work. And then a opportunity came up with Boone and Crockett, looking for a wildlife, background person to be the assistant director of records, and I applied for that job. I actually, I probably told the story before, but when I got the interview, it was because I drew a mountain goat tag that year in Oregon. Buck Buckner, who at the time was the vice president of Big Game Records, was presenting at the conference. And so I just made sure there was a seat next to me at lunch. By the time he came out the end of the line, it was the only seat left in the room. And that was kind of my introduction to conservation, was meeting Buck. And that was on a weekend. On Monday morning, I got a call from Boone and Crockett. Excuse me, Boone and Crockett. And, that was in 2008, and absolutely just loving the conservation world. Once I got a taste of it, wanted to go more and more. Spent 15 years there running their records program, and Pope and Young has always been, they were kind of an offshoot of Boone and Crockett in the 60s. The founder had asked Boone and Crockett if they could use the record system and start their own records to prove the validity of archery hunting, because not all states accepted it as a valid method to take. And so BNC and PNY have always had a very close relationship. Their structure was set up very similar to BNC's in the beginning. And so, going over there, I got to keep the fun parts of Boone and Crockett. I still serve on the records committee. I'm still on their ethics committee, still very engaged with that organization. But it helped bring the organizations closer, moving over to the ED for Pope and Young. And, the other thing that excites me, archery is the only faction of hunting that's actually growing. The number of archers taken to the field is the only group that's actually getting bigger. And so, from my thought process, man, that's a place that I need to be to get these guys, into the conservation fold and continue the efforts that the conservationists before us has done, and make sure that the archers are hearing that same message as everybody else is.
Well, very interesting. I hadn't realized that that was one of the demographics or segments of the industry that's growing. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about Pope and Young itself. And you talked about your history in 1960 and the important work that's being done there. You guys have the 3 pillars: preserve, promote, protect. Let's talk a little bit about each of those pillars and maybe which one you think of those 3 pillars that we really need to focus on heavily over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And you've seen it, like you know the history. You've been with Boone and Crockett a long time. then you transitioned over. Let's look forward and see where we need to go in terms of your perspective from Pope and Young.
Yeah, so I mean, all three pillars have a very solid piece. I mean, that's why we have all three of them. The promote. I mean, that's twofold. Obviously, that's the R3 efforts, the recruitment, getting folks into archery. But also, I think it's just as important on that promote pillar to do the outreach to maybe the people that aren't going to hunt themselves, but make sure that we are showing them that bow hunters and hunters in general are respectful. We're not out there just wantonly killing anything that wanders by. I mean, we do have a very big concern for the resource, and so that, like I said, a two prong on the promote side. The preserve, that one covers our records, but also the history of archery. And there's, it's kind of crazy when you look at archery versus some of the other stuff. I mean, early 1900s, there was people shooting target archery, but bow hunting really wasn't a thing. Clay Newcomb just did an amazing podcast on Ishi, and that's kind of where Pope and Young traces its foundings to is he, Dr. Saxton Pope was his doctor. And Ishi taught Pope about how to, bow hunt it like a Native American would, taught him a lot of those things. And that honestly was kind of the start of archery within the United States was, and there, that's where our name comes from, Saxton Pope, Art Young. Those two learned from Ishi and, kind of invigorated the archery hunting in the United States. And so not only are we keeping the records and ensuring that, the wildlife is still available, it's still doing well, it's also preserving that history of archery, where we came from. And then the final one, the protect, this is kind of where I see fair chase falling in, where the, ensuring the opportunities are out there, but also, and I think we'll probably dive into this a little further, protecting archery for what it really was, the opportunity with a low success rate, short range weapon, protecting that ability for hunters to get a field. And it was never a high success game. It was always, you had long seasons, you had great opportunity to be in the woods, the whole experience was there, but it wasn't necessarily, a guaranteed kill. And I think as technology creeps into both the archery world and hunting in general, that's a thing that we really have to work to ensure that we're protecting, is those seasons and the opportunity that are out there. Because in the face of these expanding technologies and increasing success rates, the wildlife cannot sustain those super long seasons when the animals are a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, holy dynamite! Lot to unpack there, and love where we're heading with this. Let's talk a little bit. I want to just go back on the preserve side, and I know Boone and Crockett. The history there. Dating back to Teddy Roosevelt and having those records to watch for trends, to inform wildlife management. Talk a little bit about the role Pope and Young plays and how those records, because I know you guys keep those harvest records, how that is influencing wildlife agencies and management bodies in decision making, and the important role that is. And I look here in BC, and we have one bow area only. That's it. There's one, and so the government will come to us like, oh, we need to shut down sheep hunting here because there's too much pressure. And one of the things we said, well, is there any way we can keep it open on an archery season, right? And can we use that? And our archery zone has been very successful, in my opinion, from what I've seen. But there's sort of a reluctance. That's not their go-to. They're like, no, we're just going to shut it down. So let's touch a little bit on the wildlife records side and the historical benefit of those with relating to the preserve side, please.
Right. So like I said in the beginning, the records, they use Boone and Crockett's system. There's a couple slight variations just because of lower minimums, but realistically it's the same. It's the same scoring system. The same rules are applied. And they started keeping them again to prove that archery hunting was valid. And so Boone and Crockett, their record system is 100% gauging, the science of things. I mean, that's why they take pickups, those hit by cars. Ours can be used in conjunction with Boone and Crockett's. It's a big data set. So we've got certain researchers that are looking at BNC data, and then they'll look at the archery side as well and say, okay, do both these data sets fit my hypothesis? Is the archery a little different? But, ours historically have been more used to convince states and even other countries that, hey, these are all records of wildlife taken with a bow. We keep demographics on the number of arrows, shot placement, all that stuff. And so that's what our data set serves, is more of the, the proof of, the success and what can be done with a bow. And within that data, as we have increasing technologies and changing game laws, we can see in our data what those effects are to the archery hunter, right? And so, an area that historically was putting out a bunch, again, it won't tell us what changed, but we can say, hey, this area is dropping or increasing, on the number of this trophy quality. Are we seeing more because of better technology? Are we seeing more because of more on the ground? It won't answer that. But again, it is looking at those trends and an overall snapshot of the North American game taken with the bow.
There's been leaps and bounds in technology over the years. If we look back to the Pope and Young days, they're unrecognizable. But we still got guys out there with trad bows and sort of very traditional material. But then you look at the advanced technologies now with is that a threat to Pope and Young, and is it a threat to hunters? And you obviously are raising that issue, but when we dealt with it here, we got in a bunch of hot water around fair chase with scopes on bows and that sort of stuff. So, and then it was more actually almost internal. It wasn't really it wasn't the anti-hunter, the non-hunter. It was our own community going, hey man, like there's some issues here. And then when we kind of took a stance on some of this technology, it's like, okay, there's got to be a bit of balance here. We got a ton of pushback. It's almost an internal issue within the hunting community that we need to resolve, I think, for starters.
Well, and I don't think the technology is a threat to Pope and Young in general. It's more increasing success rates with, there's limited amount of habitat out there, limited amount of game. And if that technology is increasing our success rates, that's more the issue. That's the opportunity that, when I was growing up as a kid, I could buy an archery tag in Oregon and hunt the entire month all over the state type deal. I mean, it wasn't, and you never killed an elk, but you always saw them. They were always close. And that's where I kind of cut my teeth was chasing Roosevelts in the frickin' rainforest of Oregon. Well, BC's the same thing on the coast, but chasing those big rosies. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And, it wasn't about the success. It was the opportunity. But when all these states are going now to where you have to wait and draw a tag, man, that's going to be a hard pill for that young kid to swallow. You got to wait 5 years to maybe get an elk tag. They're going to have other interests by that time. And so that's where I see the biggest threat of technology. And it's not that technology's bad. It's not that, some of these things don't make us more efficient hunters or more selective hunters that we can really target our harvest. But it's the fact a lot of them can be pretty abused. And so we're trying to lead that conversation of, is this a technology that shouldn't be allowed at all? Or can we self-regulate and say, hey, sure, this new rangefinder will put a spot on my map on my phone. Legally or not, should I send that to my buddy that's making a stock? That's the stuff that we got to just be having the conversations. And maybe it doesn't make a difference, but I mean, we've always said no radio communications of the location of game for both organizations. That technology has the ability to 100% walk someone right in on game from somebody, 4,000 yards away watching. And, we as an organization feel that type of thing dilutes the reward and the effort of the hunt. And we get stuck in a lot. They're the old fuddy-duddies and my beard's turning grayer by the day, so maybe they're not wrong. But, we do really think that, like, folks understanding the process, understanding the effort that goes in, and really earning it is a big part of the experience, and the respect for the game. Too many shortcuts. All of a sudden, you go out, you take half a day, you go kill a nice buck that you drew the tag for, and you're done. I do think that and that's it's just harder to defend as well. And so, again, should everybody be out there shooting a self bow? No, we're not saying that. It's just, keep in mind these technologies when you're deciding if you're going to use something. Is it a shortcut, or is it going to make you a better hunter in terms of selectivity, and not having an adverse effect through your actions?
Well said, and that's a huge issue internally, obviously within our space, and then externally when people start seeing this stuff and they see like, oh, the animal there wasn't fair chase really. So when we look at that, what are some of the big issues? So you mentioned obviously radios. What are some of the other controversial issues that we're primarily seeing that have come across your desk? And I'm not really looking for a position statement on P&Y at all, but just more so like what are the big ones that are you guys are seeing that are really controversial in our space?
I guess it's not necessarily controversial, but the bow sights that have built-in range finding capabilities that then project the pin. An argument can be made. It's a very precise way to shoot, but at the same time, and similar to long-range rifle shooting, just because the equipment has the capability to do it doesn't necessarily mean the shooter does. And we say you can't have, and Boone and Crockett does as well, you can't have a scope with built-in range finding capabilities. But on the archery side, that's one of the more common ones that maybe isn't out there that we say, no, this is a bit too far. You can have a rangefinder, you can have an adjustable pin, but once that's the line in the sand that we've drawn, is that mechanization of adjusting that automatically within the sight. As long as the rangefinder is separate from the sight, you're good. But when it does it for you, like I said, that's where both organizations said, no, this has gone too far. Is it that different than, the adjustable versus the automatic? No. But where is there a line that's easily defendable? And that happened to be it. Personally, I'd like it to be a little further back. The turrets and some of the things we see on rifles and some of the distances these bows can shoot, I think it's a little much. But again, fair chase isn't my personal perspective. It's the bare minimum that we put out there to put in the standards. Most hunters should hold themselves to a higher standard than what those minimums are. But that's why that line in the sand on the sights is there.
Awesome. If we just go back a little bit to R3, and you talked about the growing community of archery, and that's one of the demographics within our hunting space that is growing. Talk a little bit maybe on R3 and what you guys are doing, and maybe why you feel that you're seeing this trend of growth on the bow hunting side.
Well, bow hunting's cool, and a lot of it, tip of the hat to some of the podcasters and whatnot that have embraced the bow hunting lifestyle. And I think a lot of it's driven by that. It is very cool. The other thing that a lot of folks don't think about is, there's a lot of people that are interested in conservation and the outdoors and hunting, but we've spent a lot of time in a very, heated discussion about firearms, and people that didn't grow up around them, they've got a fear of them. They've been told that they're all bad and whatnot. And so the other thing is, it's a great way that somebody from a part of the world that never grew up around guns or shooting or any of that and is really intimidated by a firearm, a bow gives them the ability to kind of ease into that. And I think we're seeing some of those effects. I do think that there are people that have heard so much about guns and how scary they are that they just want nothing to do with it, but they are willing to pick up a bow. And from our archery efforts, we do sponsor some youth camps. We're working with partnering with some organizations, but there's some absolutely phenomenal groups out there that really have grabbed the bull by the horns in terms of getting kids shooting bows in schools and bringing them into bow hunting. And so we're not really a leader in R3. That's not in our wheelhouse. I don't have staff that are dedicated educators, but we do work with these other organizations that have taken that bull on and support them where we can, get their word out there, that type of thing. So that's where our recruitment efforts mainly lie.
Yeah, right on. If we sort of segue to the protect side now, and we look at the public perception and hunting in general. Hunting's been getting a black eye for a while now. How do we see, what path forward do you see, and what major, what can we do to sort of, secure the protection part of what we do of hunting, but even, more specifically bow hunting for you guys at P&Y?
So with the issues we see, and obviously the U.S. is a little bit different in Canada in terms of our management structure, but you guys saw the same thing with the outlawing of the grizzly bear hunt. The emotions driving science decisions is not good. Ballot box biology is not good, and that is the biggest thing to protect hunting and the funding models of wildlife. I feel is maintaining that scientific decision-making process and, making sure that the decisions are coming to our U.S. Fish and Wildlife and not being answered by, politicians or by the courts on, species delisting, what should and shouldn't be happening. And I feel like when we're talking to other hunters and outside the hunting community, I mean, we legitimately have the science in our pocket as a conservation, community. I mean, the very first wildlife work done in the United States was by Boone and Crockett. I mean, they funded the first wildlife before wildlife was a field. We have always tried to manage game through science, through research, and you'll hear a lot in these debates of follow the best science. Well, we as hunters have kind of always had that and really promoted it. And I think we need to make sure we stay there. Montana's got an issue going right now with a particular legislator didn't feel that they were killing enough wolves, so they're actually suing the state. Man, those end arounds, they make us all look bad. Whether or not the quota of wolves needed to be increased isn't really the point here. It's the fact that people are not following the science, not following the state managing agencies. I mean, these people have dedicated their whole lives to becoming experts on, sustainable harvest, habitat projects and whatnot to prevent it there. And that's, from my perspective, the biggest thing is making sure the agencies that are in place to manage these things that have done a great service to the country by bringing the wildlife to the point it is gets to maintain the management ability, and it doesn't get solved by, again, ballot box biology or, courtroom annex.
Yeah, really well said, Justin. And one of my concerns in this modern era is people now that are pursuing a career in conservation or biology, within these state agencies and provincial agencies that maybe are more prone to managing on emotion and not so heavily influenced by the science. And they're not a lot. I think a lot when I look at our provincial agency, our government staff. A lot of the biologists grew up in a hunting family. They cared about wildlife. They want to get involved because, there was an attachment in a rural environment, maybe that they were, they loved the wildlife and they wanted to help. But I think now we're seeing a bit of a transition, and I know Wild Sheep Foundation has identified this, is that they're seeing biologists are coming into it and that are kind of anti-hunting. They never grew up in a hunting family. They're not really pro-hunting, and they have some real serious issues with it. And I think that's legitimate. We look at organizations like the Wildlife Society. What work can we do to make sure? And I think that's a real serious threat. I agree with you 100%. So what steps do we need to take to make sure the people in those roles are the ones that are going to start, continue to follow the science-based wildlife management and ensure that they're sort of playing by the rules book that they've always played by?
You know, a lot of the wildlife community, the conservation community, have invested in, outreach tools to these people where they're again, the fact is we go to the science and we go to the funding of where, wildlife funding comes from is these hunter dollars. And, you know, I went to school with a bunch of people that were in a natural resource major that did not have the same upbringing as me, and they were out to save the world. But at the same time, when you look at it and say, okay, well, you know, I mean, not hunting an animal, morally, some people would support that, but it's like, at the end of the day, the value put on them, the money put into them of seeing them and whatnot, as long as we show them that North American model, which is funded through hunter dollars and Pittman Robertson dollars, and make sure that that's continually taught. There's been talk about updating the North American model of wildlife management, the Seven Sisters or whatever you want to call it, to be more inclusive and increase funding. And I think that's a valid conversation. But again, we got to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of, what did the North American model, where did it take us from to where we are now? Is there parts of it that could be improved? Maybe. But we can't forget what got us there, and just making sure these new students see that, and appreciate the actual full history of conservation. And, the challenges we face now are not the same as they did back then. But that doesn't mean the methodologies and the fundings and the ideals that was put forth, that worked for the United States aren't still relevant to the discussion and probably still shouldn't be staying in place.
I think the work that Boone and Crockett's done over the years, and the work that Pope and Young's done over the years on models, and we tie it back to Teddy Roosevelt. If we go back to the B and C days, there's that history there and that historical perspective. And 99% of the general public do not know anything about that. Do we need to do more? More groundwork on that to make sure that the greater public knows about that work, and it doesn't matter. We see these different programs about hunting and these initiatives, and we got one in BC here that we've driven, the One Campfire, the Wild Sheep Foundation's involved in, and Joe ABC. There's a multitude of programs out there that are really important, I think. But do we need to do one more as a community? You turn on national TV or you listen to, I don't even know anymore. Like, media today is so skewed in so many ways, and I don't even know who watches TV anymore. But do we need to do these national campaigns, reaching out and making sure people are recognize the work that's been done by hunters, because people do not know? How do we get that message out there? It's a huge undertaking.
The campaigns are successful, but you spend much time on social media and you'll see that a lot of people's algorithms are echo chambers. And the challenge isn't that we've done some great, some organizations have put some great information out there. There's great statistics on these things that are available. But the challenge is how do we get that in front of the people that again aren't the hunters, that haven't heard this message and been a part of it, and I think part of it is as hunters, we need to be educated, not just the conservation groups. We do a bit, but I feel like a lot of this can be one of, if you're educated and have legitimate statistics, and you see someone on your personal Facebook feed, that's talking about one of these topics and kind of going off in the weeds, don't start a fight. Don't be belligerent. But I think those conversations from people they respect of just saying, hey, actually, here's what's taking place there. I had a friend that I went to high school with that she's gone the exact opposite. Animal sanctuaries, pet lovers for Bernie type person, but we're still friends on Facebook. And there's been a couple things that had to do with hunters that I was able to engage and say, hey, no, you really can't go out there and beat pots and pans to scare the geese out of your neighbor's field. That's hunter harassment. You could get in trouble. And actually had a productive conversation. And I think those are super important. And I think that's one thing that the hunting community we're not necessarily great at, is that respectful discussion of listening to their, meeting them where they are and then slightly telling that story. I mean, that's what we haven't been doing, and I think that's where we're missing the boat. It's not that the information hasn't been, put together. It's not that it's not available, but it's just making sure that it's disseminated to the groups that maybe wouldn't be seeing it any other way.
Well, I think that that's one thing that, I've talked to other people about this too, and I think that as hunters, we have a responsibility, and a lot of people think, oh, well, organizations need to do this, but we all have a personal responsibility. And, what is it? One in every, like I look in BC, we have 4 million people and we have 100,000 hunters. So, if you had, every so many, I don't do the math on that. That's a pretty bad average. I guess it's 1 in 40, so 2.5%. But if 2.5% of the population was purporting that message passionately to everybody, I think we'd be in a lot better shape, because when we talk about hunting, when I talk about my friends, even my vegan friends or certainly my non-hunting friends, people are like, oh, wow, okay, like people's perspective changes when you talk to them about it. And I think we all need a little bit of personal accountability. We need organizational responsibility, yes, but man, if you care about hunting, you need to sort of carry that torch. And I know you do it all the time, Justin, and you're a leader in that. You do a great job on it, but I think we all need to take that personal responsibility. And if we don't, like we can't hope that Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett or Wild Sheep Foundation or Wild Turkey is going to save hunting. That's not.
Right.
That's not. We all have a personal responsibility.
No, I mean the place I see for those organizations is making the information available to our members, but the people that aren't hunters and don't live the life we do, they're not seeing any of these organizations as experts, but there's people, like you said, your vegan friends. I mean, do we share the same views? No, of course not. But there's a respect there, and they will listen to us. And that, again, the organizations need to put the information in the hands of our members and educate them on the way to have, civil discourse on it. But it does fall down to the actual hunter to have those discussions and push it out beyond our own ranks.
Yeah, well said, for sure. Okay, cool. We could talk about that all day.
Yeah,
and obviously it's really important. From an archery perspective, how important is the messaging there around sort of, some people beat up on archery about, harvest rates and wounding and all that sort of stuff. Is that an important narrative, and is that something that you guys encourage your members to get involved in and be more proactive in? And how important is that messaging? I feel like bow hunters get a little bit more respect than in the general public. I think people look at a bow hunter and say, but do you guys get much feedback or much blowback on sort of the wounding rates or success rates or anything like that?
Honestly, like you said, I mean, bow hunters are fairly respected. They're not viewed in the same negative, as negative a light by some folks as the other method hunters. But we kind of touched on it a little earlier. A lot of that heat comes from within our own ranks. Is for like Pope and Young's position on crossbows is they are a threat to the traditional archery season, because when they're allowed, they are an easier tool to learn, and they do have a higher success rate. Does that mean we hate crossbows? There's not a place for them? Not at all. But that, I could probably pull up my Facebook feed now and find 2 or 3, anti-crossbow memes or something, going around. And man, are they funny? Do they cause me to chuckle? Certainly. But at the end of the day, we need to be having these higher level conversations within ourselves of like, if you're in a state that can't kill enough whitetail, it's going to be awful hard to try to convince them that they shouldn't have a crossbow in that season, when the harvest rates are not to where they need to be. That being said, when we come out west where people are waiting, years for an opportunity, I would argue it's very detrimental to add crossbows where it's going to increase that success rate and spread that draw time out even further. And so within our own ranks, I think, yeah, every hunter has a responsibility to make a good, clean shot. You know, yes, historic data that they did on wounding rate with archery was high enough. It makes me uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean I'm going to quit bow hunting. It just means I make sure of my shot and that personal ethic and level that everybody holds themselves to. We need to make sure that's maintained, and that's a constant discussion. Be an ethical bow hunter. I mean, that was Pope and Young had their biennial convention earlier this year, and we had a board meeting there, and that was one thing they really wanted to focus on was the ethical bow hunting, the fair chase bow hunter, which works great for me because I still love the fair chase from my old job. So being able to bridge that gap and help BNC bring that message to more hunters, on the fair chase side of it, and I think honestly that's where we address some of those statistics and those wounding loss rates and whatnot. Is ethical bow hunters aren't out there shooting too far and leaving arrows and bulls. That's not an ethical hunter that's doing it. And so we need to call out those that are and try to put that to a stop, but there's bad apples in every bunch. It's not archery hunters only. There's bad rifle hunters, there's bad crossbow hunters, bad spear hunters, whatever it may be.
Yeah, well said. Justin, one thing I've noticed in our community is, we lack solidarity. We have a hard time all getting on the same page, and I mean the hunting community. And it's to your point that you just talked about. Oh, there's crossbow hunters, and there's rifle hunters, and there's the traditional bow hunters, and there's all these little microsects, and I get that, and I'm and other spaces have that too, but it seems really pervasive when really there is a wolf at the door. Like I don't care what anyone says, there is a wolf at the door. We are under pressure. There's people that don't want us out there doing what we all love, and we're all united in that. But there seems to be like a lack of a lack of acknowledgement of that. I think everyone thinks, oh yeah, hunting is maybe at risk or under threat. And the one thing that I'm not super keen on is this, and I get it. Like there's organizational responsibilities. You got Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett, and you guys are very much aligned. But then you have a responsibility to look after your members. So that's your job. I have a responsibility to look after my members. But the one thing that I'd love to see is a more solidarity as a community, as a hunting community, and just respecting and saying, okay, there's a place for that, and respecting what's legal and ethical, and if it does a service to what we believe in, then we should really try and support it. How do we do a better job of that? Because I feel like there's a disconnect along the way, and we need to get on the same page.
That's a great question, Kyle, and we've all been trying to do it, and we all see. You've got like AWCP, where you get that unified voice a little bit in the U.S. I'm sure you're familiar with it from the wild sheep side on the sign-on letters and whatnot. That's a pretty good thing, but excuse me. I'm not really sure of what other than, again, being a representative. If somebody's bagging on a crossbow hunter, for no reason other than bagging on him, maybe step into that conversation and be like, hey man, the state of whatever is not killing enough deer and they're out there knocking them down, and I think again, it's bringing us together, but at the same time, like we also have to be self-reflective. I don't want people, the U.S., it's 6.8% of our population hunts. Man, if we're doing something that 78% that don't hunt themselves but support it don't like, it doesn't matter if that 6.8% are all on the same page. We're still going to get outvoted. And so, again, where does that lie? How do we bring everybody together and say, okay, divergence here is okay. Have funks amongst yourselves. It's not serious, but where are the things and who can we bring them all together and say, hey, dang it. Made it worse talking to you, I think, Kyle.
It's all good. What I'll do is I'll edit that stuff out of there so that Yeah. No worries.
But
Yeah.
yeah, where do we, how do we bring everybody together on a unified front? I think that's a challenge we're all still facing, and I don't think that there's an easy answer. And if you hear one, let me know.
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest challenges in our community, and one of the greatest threats. I think most of us are talking about it, that it is a concern, but we all have our own organizational goals that we're trying to accomplish, and it's not really like, that's not the very heart of what we're doing. So it's a tough one, and it's something that we'll have to continue to work on and come together as a community. So
Well, I
awesome.
do
Okay,
think, the organizations, we all work together pretty well. Obviously I worked with Keith, who's now at Wild Sheep, when I was at BNC. Keith and I have a great relationship. And, so Pope and Young, BNC, Wild Sheep, Mule Deer Foundation. We are all kind of together, but yeah, there's always room for improvement to be working as a single unit, and at the same time supporting your members in your little section of it, for the greater good. And, I try to, Pope and Young's about archery and whatnot, but I don't see any of my messaging not being applicable to all hunters. And when we're putting something out, I try to make sure that, yes, this is bow hunter centric in some aspects, but this is applicable to the entire community of what we're saying here. And I think if all the organizations work on that, I think it's only going to help us.
Yeah, well said. Okay, awesome. Let's transition a little bit, and so obviously you guys have records. You've come from a records background, having been involved with Boone and Crockett. And when you look at on the archery side, and we look at big game archery in North America, what might surprise hunters or conservationists? Is there anything species specific? I know that it's not your job to analyze the data, but is there anything that comes to mind that you've seen species specific in trends in archery that have changed over the years? Or I know we've touched a little bit on this already about the growing demographic of archers, but is there any specific thing on the archery side relating to big game, species specific, that you've noticed trends wise?
The thing that's kind of surprised me the most is, man, the top end of Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett are getting closer and closer. We just did a judges panel on a bull in Washington that was an archery taken bull that was within 3/8 of breaking Boone and Crockett's world record. And so
wow.
the fact that we're seeing, very significant trophies now taken with archery, I guess to me it kind of suggests a little bit that this, it makes the case that the technology is making us better, and so we need to maybe be careful with it. But that's the biggest thing, is just seeing the caliber of animals that people are taking with the bow. Now, historically, there's been some tremendous bow taken trophies in history. But the number of world records we're seeing, the number of very high-end trophies we're seeing, to me seems to be a lot higher than we've ever seen in history of what's now being taken by bows.
Yeah, well said. And so we look at, when we go to sheep, on the sheep side, we've got world record sheep. How close are we on the archery side to challenging that world record, the BNC records on that stuff? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, historically, before the the 200s boom of the last decade, when it seemed like every awards program, it was all 200-inch sheep that used to be, big horns used to be kind of the holy grail. We're 15 inches off now. I think Pope and Young's world record's still that, low 200s. Right at 200, and obviously the wild horse ram or whatever is the world record. So there's a pretty big separation there. I'm trying to think.
But the thing is, with wild horse, that was a found dead too, right? That wasn't a hunter harvested. So, but it's only a couple inches or whatever and change above the.
It is. Still. It's absolutely amazing seeing the caliber of sheep that we've been seeing. In the desert sheep. There's obviously there's a lot coming out of Mexico, but we looked at the records, both organizations, like, man, we're getting inundated with desert sheep, And so we ran the numbers, and it's like, okay, well, is this completely carried by Mexico? It's not. Like the big rams are coming from both sides of the border, and so, that's obviously, everybody hears the rumblings about things happening in the sheep world south of the border and this and that. I was so happy to see that it was happening in the border states as well. To me, that was a sigh of relief of like, okay, it's there's issues that we need to work on, but it's not the glaring issue of why we're seeing the giant rams. And so, there's been some big deserts, but not there's a pretty big variance there between the two. You've got some stone sheep and doll sheep areas that are archery only, so those rams are obviously crankers. But you know the likelihood of killing a buck stone or a buck doll sheep now. They're just not what they were in the '60s, and so
yeah,
is there some big rams? Certainly, but something's going to have to change up there for us to ever get to the point where we're tickling world records again on thin horns from where I sit.
Cool. Okay. What role do you believe that record keeping? So you've got that history with Boone and Crockett, now Pope and Young. What do you see it playing in influencing wildlife policy, habitat protection, that sort of stuff, and maybe on the focusing on the archery side with that sort of under that lens?
So the biggest thing that I see with records, and it's citizen science. It allows the hunter to make that small contribution to the overall message. And I'm always preaching this of somebody like, oh, I've got a bigger buck in the book, I'm not going to put in this one. It's like, guys, that's exactly what the records are for. If you used to kill 170s and now we're killing 160s, that trend is important. Just as important if we were killing 170s and it's now 180s. And so, the role I think it is it allows hunters to do it. And we also have to do a better job of telling that story of most people today, I'd argue, hunters have kind of changed and they may not care. Some obviously still do, but it may not mean as much as maybe past generations to see your name in a book. But man, the value of that data, don't look at your name in the book next to a head. Look at your name in the book as someone that's contributing to conservation and ensuring that we're headed the right way. And into the future. We want to track these things. We want to have the data set. The example I don't have one for Pope and Young yet, but at Boone and Crockett, it was like, well, what does these data say? Well, I can tell you the average distance that a Boone and Crockett trophy's taken out was 69 yards at the time. And that's, kind of amazing. We don't have the ability to look at that. And so, when we're talking about groups being, divergent, arguing amongst themselves, man, this is kind of the way to call them to the carpet, right? You can say, okay, what is the data saying? Are people killing stuff at 700 yards that make the book? No, they're not. Are people shooting bows that, are going this fast or whatever it is? No, this is where you have the data set to actually watch trends within the equipment and within the particular space and see what effects those are having on harvest rates, on harvest quality. And so, I think they're very important. And I'd ask anybody listening, I know it's a pain to go through the process of getting something scored, but at the end of the day, man, that's a piece of history that, respect the animal to the point. As hunters, we always do, but that's another way to even further that respect and make sure that, you ate the animal, you took its life, you utilized every bit of it. Well, that's another way that you can ensure that animal's life goes to good by making it a part of that record as we're tracking those trends.
Yeah, well said. Justin, can you let us know what you perceive as sort of the biggest threat to bow hunting and maybe Pope and Young too, sort of in the next decade? Social license, demographics, regulatory changes, land access. What are sort of the main things that you see are the primary threat to what archery really?
Honestly, I think it's probably going to be so the biggest threat I think is I mean, it's probably going to be technology and the advancement and ensuring that we limit ourselves to where we don't become too successful. Um, it's hard, and I've always said this. It's very hard to sell conservation to a younger generation that never saw game at a low level. You talk to our conservation forefathers. I mean, Jack Rideau, who ran the records program at BNC, told me a story of driving across the state to go look at a deer track. Those guys had skin in the game. They saw what populations could have been and then what conservation did. And so telling that story, making sure people understand the value of conservation, that we don't get too efficient. I mean, I think, and it's not just Pope and Young. I think that's industry wide. I don't think bow hunting is facing a unique challenge that hunting in general is not. And so, I feel like we might have a little bit of an advantage, like you said. If there's areas that can't sustain rifle harvest, allowing an archery season is a great option. There's a lot of urban hunts now where they don't want firearms in cities, but bow hunters are able to hunt that urban interface and still hunt there. And so again, I think we're almost a little more insulated, but it's that success, it's that easy kill mentality, or that game's a unlimited resource that we just got to be super careful and make sure that we don't bite ourselves in the process.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, what do you see as kind of the greatest opportunities? Maybe you already covered that. You did touch a little bit on some of the opportunities there, but is that what you kind of see as the greatest opportunities moving forward for the bow hunting community?
I do, and I also, we're, the topic of governor's tags and whatnot's always a heated debate, and the funding's very necessary. But I'm not wondering if maybe there's not a little bit of an opportunity for maybe one of these special permits archery only. So some of the perceived things with those tags that doesn't sit well with your average hunter, I guess, is that they're hunting a particular ram or they're buying a ram, whatever that may be. Well, if you're just trying to sell an opportunity, and if the state's interested, I think an archery governor's tag would be a great idea. And I worked with the Acoma Pueblo down in New Mexico. They actually offered us a velvet, basically governor's tag that we auctioned at our convention. It was quite successful, and that sold for almost as much as their overall, any weapon permit. And so, I think that's a great opportunity because the funding from those tags is important, but at the same time, we want to make sure we're not, top shooting everything. So maybe if we limit it to a more primitive weapon that has a lower success rate, maybe that's an answer for some states facing some blowback.
So obviously the native partner there, they were on board with it and supported it. Have you had any dialogue with any state agencies on that, and what sort of feedback have you received?
I mean, not officially in any capacity, more,
right,
at a wildlife conference after hours or something, like, hey, what would the thought of this be? Would this be something that could fly? In most of the states, it's not an easy lift, right? They can't say, oh, let's give it a try type deal. And so, I think the tribes have a little more leeway. So that's kind of where we started with this idea to see how it works with them. But we're always looking and trying to find, as an organization, I mean, if, I wish you would have reached out when you guys were talking up there about that area that they were going to either close or have an archery hunt. Cause I have the data on sheep hunting that I could have said, hey, here's a supporting fact, for what these guys are asking for. That's the type of opportunity that we need to capitalize on as an organization to ensure that bow hunting opportunities continue. Yeah,
great point. And truth to be told on that, that conversation kind of went away. They didn't make a regulation change, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I will reach out. I think that having that data is going to be really helpful. So yeah, I appreciate you raising that. It never even crossed my mind, and but that'll be really, really helpful going into those conversations. And they're going to come up in the future because they're going to come in and say, hey, we're going to shut this down. We're like, okay, here's the stats. This is what, can we look at this? So I appreciate that. It's brilliant. Okay, so A couple things before we wrap up. For bow hunters that are listening, what do they need to know about submitting P&Y entries, measuring criteria, rule changes, documentation, best practices? What do they need to do to sort of fulfill any requirements that you guys have?
Yeah, so I mean, we're working very closely with Boone and Crockett. A good number of the official measures out there now. We're working on getting all of them jointly trained, but all workshops we're doing now are trained. So, go on the Pope and Young website, reach out to a measure if you have one. They'll help walk you through the process of getting the photos and the entry. Realistically, our Fair Chase is very similar to Boone and Crockett's. We do say no electronics on the bow other than potentially like a Luminoc or a camera, but if you've got a bunch of electronics on your bow, you should probably check our rules. But realistically, it's very similar to BNC in terms of, no radio usage, no electronic devices that deliver, the real-time location of game. That's one thing. On the trail camera side, Pope and Young, and this was when I was still at BNC, but we did it jointly with Pope and Young. We updated the wording on cellular trail cameras because, as it said, any camera that transmits, data to the hunter is not eligible. Well, if you read that, technically, if you got a picture of a fawn, that fawn was safe for life in terms of Fair Chase because he had his picture taken with the cellular trail camera. So clearly it's like, okay, that's a little restrictive, how do we do this? And so both organizations came together and said, okay, cellular trail cameras are here, people are using them, but when are you going to violate it? And what we decided that the violation of Fair Chase was if you take that data and it creates a real-time decision, right? So, it's rifle season here in Montana. If I'm sitting here having a conversation with you, I get a picture on my phone and I go shoot that deer. That's a real-time action. So that deer would not be eligible. Now, at the end of the day, I'm going to go hunting tomorrow. I check my camera, like, hey, I'm going to go stand A or B, and you look and say, oh, okay, stand A, had the buck come by. I'm going to go sit that tomorrow. That's not a violation. That's the same as pulling a camera card. But again, that's one that both organizations came together and said, hey, we know the technology's here, but this is where it would inherently it's not bad, but it could be, abused, and that's what we did. And so that's another one is that we get a lot of questions on the cameras, but all of our Fair Chase rules are on our website, www.pope-young.org. There's a bunch of stuff on there. We've got a great raffle going right now. It's all of 2026. We're giving away a hunt a month. If you get in between now and the end of the year and you pay for all 12 months, not only will we give you 2 chances in every month, we'll also give you a freaking chance at a 13th hunt. So whoever wins gets to pick any of the hunts. So that grand prize winner picks any of the hunts. There's a BC mountain goat hunt on there. There's a Utah Shiras moose hunt on there. Sitka blacktail boat-based hunt out of Kodiak. There's a there's a bunch of absolutely great hunts on there. So if you're a bow hunter and you want to support the organization, jump on the website, see what we've got going on. We've got some interesting stuff in the wildlife world in terms of the corner crossing ruling that just came out of the 10th Circuit Court. We're looking at that issue in Colorado with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, limiting where they can bring those in to just, the Rocky Mountain area, the recovery area. So all those things are on there. And, you don't have to be a successful bow hunter. You don't have to have one in the book. You just have to support bow hunting, archery hunting, and conservation. And we'd love to have you join as a general member. And you can do that on the website.
Well, you just did a hell of a pitch there, buddy. I'm not an archery hunter. I have hunted archery. I've taken an animal before, and I love it. And actually, that was my wife wanted to get into it. She's like, okay, when we were moving, she's like, we need to get into archery, and I kind of dissuaded her in the sense that, well, let's go and do a rifle hunt and get your feet wet, But she's super keen on it. But anyway, you got me fired up, buddy. I'm not a member. I'm embarrassed to say I'm going to go buy a membership when we get off this call here. And I just appreciate all you're doing, brother. Pope and Young's doing great work. You're doing great work. You're a leader in our space, and really, really excited about it. I guess in closing, what excites you most about Pope and Young, future bow hunting? What really gets you fired up that you're really looking forward to about the organization, the great work that you guys are doing?
Man, it's kind of selfish, but like I said, some of my favorite hunting memories were chasing elk in the brush with a bow. And being able to work and preserve that. I mean, my son turned 10 this year and he shot his first deer. I don't know if you saw it on Facebook or whatever, but, giving him the opportunity to be able to chase critters around for a month with a bow in the woods and not kill a damn thing, but have a bunch of stories to tell about trying, that's why I'm excited. And obviously, not just my son. I mean, everybody's the same, but man, ensuring that opportunity and that ability to go out and experience the wildlife and learn those lessons with a bow in hand, I feel like as an expanding part of the hunting community, I think we can kind of be a leader in extending that olive branch, and we're just really well positioned in the world right now. A big thanks to Hunger Games and all that stuff. I mean, archery's cool, so we've got the tools, and that really excites me to engage new people to tell the conservation story. And so I think Pope and Young's got a great future, and it's just making sure we can capitalize on it.
Well said, man. I'm really stoked, and I feel bad about dissuading my wife. I hate these podcasts because I have a conversation and then I go out and do something stupid like spend a couple grand on getting set up on archery. So it's just these are expensive podcasts. So but you got me fired up again, and that's we had identified that we did want to get right into the archery scene, and I was like, okay, well let's get your feet wet. And she's taken her first animal, and I know she's keen to do it, so I'm really stoked about it. So I'm going to go out and spend some money now. So thanks for that.
I'll be honest. I mean, I'm a hardcore bow hunter all bow season, but I live in a state that they give me a long time to chase them with the bow, and if I can't get it done, I can switch to a rifle. And I'll shoot a shotgun at a grouse. I'm not weapon specific. I just love hunting.
Yeah.
But bow season. I'm all in. 100% a bow hunter during bow season. So
that's awesome. Well, and I look forward to picking it up too. I never, I was fortunate enough to take a real nice Alberta mule deer and stuff, and I love it. I enjoyed it. It was so therapeutic. It's just amazing being out there, and less pressure. That's my type of hunting, right? I don't like the sort of combat hunting, and that's the one thing that I loved about the archery hunting that I did, was just the quietness and the solitude and the less, no pressure. Yeah, lower success, but man, I'd much rather have that than combat hunting. I don't enjoy that. So,
man, if there's a species that's meant to be hunted with a bow, it's a moose.
Yeah.
I don't know if you has a moose season for archery, but getting those things calling in, especially if it's like a husband and wife. Man, that's pretty cool, seeing those things come swaying in and then getting it with an arrow. That if I were in a place that I could get a moose tag more than once every decade, I would be a pretty hardcore archery moose hunter.
That's awesome. Well said. Justin, thanks so much. Thanks to you. Thanks to Pope and Young. Appreciate all you're doing, and keep up the great work. Thank you so much.
Yep. Pleasure being on.